This is the All-Star Networking Show with your host, Kathy Paper.
Welcome to the All-Star Networking Show. I am so psyched for today's guest because I think you said the other day, Rob, we go back about 10 years and it doesn't feel like that long. Yet when I saw you in action over the weekend, I remembered your magic of what you do. So thank you for being a guest today on the All-Star Networking Show. So welcome, Rob Smith. Tell the listeners a little bit about you and then we're going to chat some.
Sure. So let's see. I've been in the US now about 15 years. Was at 3M for about 25 years, left a couple years back, and have kind of semi-retired, but have fallen into a fractional executive role, doing marketing work or digital work, depending on what the client needs. But yeah, still active and in the community and trying to network and build community wherever I am. So that's, I think, probably the subject area that we'll touch on today.
Nice. And where 25 years from in the US from where? Why am I?
So I was 3M at 3M. I was at 3M Canada for about 10 years, and then 3M in Minneapolis, in St. Paul actually for about 15. So.
And are you Canadian? You have a Canadian passport?
I am Canadian, yeah. So I can transit the border and go back and forth. I've got an American passport as well. So today is election day. Hope everyone voted.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm on my way later this afternoon because I went to go wait in line and the lines were so long at two different places that I said, and everybody was really quiet that I thought today would be better. People will be a little more hyped up in like the
Yeah.
game's actually going on.
Yeah.
So let's, again, you and I met when you were at 3M and you said a lot of people connect with you to talk about your strategy with networking, but you use the word community a lot. When you think of networking, do you think networking or community or relationships? Maybe just help people get over the word networking or how you do that.
Yeah. So it can be a bit of a dirty word. There's sort of the Mad Men kind of, stick your hand out and go and introduce yourself to people. I'm an introvert, so that kind of a scenario is not something that really comes naturally to me, but I love talking to people one on one and I get a lot of energy out of that. So a conversation like this is like just a delight. A room full of 150 people, that's a drain for me, but I can put on a brave face and do that as well. But my my thinking is generally people don't hire me for what I know. Of course, you need to have skills and you need to be able to solve problems, but um, the biggest asset I have to bring to a client is my network because nobody can know the answer to everything. So if you get asked a question and you're able to tap your network to say, hey, how would you solve this problem? Or I've got kind of a sticky situation. Can you maybe give me some advice? And my ability to be able to reach out and tap um, literal world experts in different domains and disciplines is it's a pretty powerful way to find solutions for my clients. And it's a two-way street. And that's, I think, where I get to community because as often as I reach out to my network with a question or a request, I probably get 4 or 5 questions back from my network to me with the same sort of reciprocal relationship where people have questions and they're like, well, how do you solve this or how do you solve that? And one of the things people talk to me about often is like, Rob, like your network is awesome. Like they can see it in action or they'll work with me on a project and like there'll be some sort of oh, we don't know how to solve that. And usually within about 24 to 36 hours, I can come back with 2 or 3 people from my network that have either run into that issue before have seen that kind of problem, have got ideas on how to solve it, and then we can start moving forward to solve that particular challenge. And usually once that piece of work is done, that other expert will come back to me and say, like, I don't have a network that I can tap to be able to leverage the way that you do. Can you, you know, coach me or help me build my own network? And which is something I'm very happy to do.
So, okay, because that's like a lot of great places to jump off. One is people listening. There are a lot of introverts that, listen to podcasts to learn things, or introverts that hear the word networking and are like, I don't want to do this. And I loved how you just said you like the one-on-one and you can kind of muster your strength through a big room.
Mhm.
Um, but how do you how did you start sort of identifying the problems to solve? You said 24 to 36 hours. How did you first build some of those connections or know that these were people you could call on? Because 24 to 36 hours that's a pretty speedy path to solve these problems.
Yeah, it sure is. So, um, I've been really intentional about who I want to connect with and um, what questions I want answers to. So I'm always in sort of a learning mode. So when I was at 3M, I was lucky enough to be about every 2 years challenged in a brand new role or a brand new assignment. And my plan to become smart as quick as I could possibly become smart in that new space was start Googling like who's writing about this topic, who are the thought leaders in this space. Follow them on LinkedIn, start reading their blogs, subscribe to their newsletters, just kind of immerse myself in that new domain. And then the other thing that I did was I would always start Googling and start figuring out where's the conference. And even though I didn't want, like, I genuinely don't. It's not that I don't enjoy people. I don't enjoy big crowds, and I don't enjoy like walking into a big conference room where there's hundreds of people. That's I usually have to take a few deep breaths and then a cup of coffee and then away I go. Um,
I wait in the parking lot, Rob, believe it or not. I have to sit in the parking lot and
yeah,
tell myself like, okay, Kathy, you can go in there, you will meet people. I start with the booze. Like I have a whole strategy for warming up. It's like going to an exercise class. You got to have a plan.
yeah. But I will go to conferences and I'm sure that 3M, my former bosses would cringe a little bit, but I mean they knew afterwards because I would tell them. I would go to conferences and sometimes I wouldn't even attend any of the sessions, but I would look at the agenda and I would find out that Kathy was speaking at noon on Tuesday. So I would reach out an email and I'd say, hey, you're probably in town. Do you have plans for breakfast? And then I would offer to buy you breakfast. And then you and I would have an awesome conversation for 60 minutes, 90 minutes. You don't have to be anywhere generally because you're not giving your talk until lunchtime.
Right.
And then you and I would have this awesome conversation. So I would go to a conference and I might go to the keynote, or if there was somebody who was speaking that I really wanted to see, I would sit in the room to listen to them. But most of the conversations were breakfast, lunch, and dinners with people that I wanted to meet with. And I would reach out ahead of time and say, look, you're going to be in town anyway. Can I buy you lunch? Can I buy you a coffee? Can I buy you dinner? And it was through those conversations that I developed these really strong networks with people who are literally experts in their field. And I would always also offer value um, before asking for anything. So it's part of this whole, oh, some people call it the go-giver methodology, or wanting to be generous with my time and energy. So, as an example, over the years, I've connected with, probably 60 or 70 experts in e-commerce. It's just kind of been my path. It's one of the things that I've done and been responsible for. So if I read a really great new McKinsey article about maybe some new e-commerce vendor or a new technique or a new tactic, I will summarize that article, two or three bullets. Maybe there's one or two graphics in it that I find especially strong that maybe communicate a new concept, at least new to me. And
Mhm.
I'll go into my CRM and I'll search on everyone that's been tagged with e-commerce. And I think there's 87 people in there right now. And I'll just send them an email and say, hey, haven't talked to you guys for a while. Just tripped over this new McKinsey article. Here's the two or three pieces of it that I think are especially strong. I've been following this analyst for a while. He really understands, B2B use case. Um, this is the graphic that I thought explained this especially well, and here's why. Hope that you're doing well. And I just send it to them. And I'm not expecting anything. I'm not asking for anything in return. And I might not talk to them again for another 6 months. Maybe it's another article or another blog post or something that I like especially. Um, that turns into, it's not why I do it, but it turns into um, usually two or three of those people will reply and say, thanks for the article. This is exactly what I needed. I'm working on a project right now in this space. Would you like to collaborate on it?
Mhm.
And people ask me why I'm so busy because I don't do any advertising and I don't do any demand generation. But people in my network will respond to that email that I sent them a couple weeks back, and they're like, "Oh, I remember that guy. I met him at the conference in California a few years ago. Um, he probably has an interesting point of view on fill in the blank." And they just reach out and they're like, "Hey, can I talk to you for a few minutes about this new project I've got going?" And I help them as much as I can. And then I would say, like more often than it should, it turns into an opportunity for us to collaborate and work together.
That's awesome. Awesome. Because again, if I were breaking it down a little bit for somebody that's listening, one, it takes kind of courage to reach out to the speaker and say, "Can I buy you breakfast?"
It does. And, I had in a way, I kind of had a get out of jail free card at the time because I was working for a big company.
Yeah.
And so if I sent them an email, they'd open it and they'd respond. But even now, like I haven't been at 3M for 2 years, I'm still reaching out to people. And I'm sure that they check me out on LinkedIn and I've got a decent network and, I'm not trying to sell them anything. It's just like, hey, we should be like based on our background and everything else, we should know more about each other. Would love
Yeah.
to buy you a virtual cup of coffee and get to know you a little better.
Yeah. And see, I just think it's really interesting that um, you said you researched people, started Googling and then found the thought leaders and then found them. And again, you mentioned your CRM, which so you use a CRM. Some people don't use a CRM. Speak to me a little bit about that. Whether did you use a CRM when you were in 3M, or how do you stay organized in this world of so many connections?
So at 3M, I used LinkedIn kind of as a contact database. I had an Excel spreadsheet, and within the company, they had Salesforce as their CRM. And for a big company, Salesforce is completely appropriate. But when I started out on my own, somebody suggested I should look at HubSpot. And, at the sort of entry level, it's free as a CRM. So it was a place where I could put, name, email address, some notes about our conversation. Um, and then I also use HubSpot to send my emails. So it kind of keeps track of, like, I haven't emailed Kathy for 6 months. I should send her a note. So it will let me know when I haven't interacted with somebody for a little while. So it helps me keep sort of up
Mm.
to date.
It
And
like reminds you to get your oil changed. I like that.
yeah. And so it's
Sure.
it's a nice system. I mean, there's lots of CRMs out there, but it's a nice system that works for me. And I actually use HubSpot for sending emails and then also for my website because if I send an email out and there's a link in it to my website, because it's all on HubSpot, it keeps track of all of those interactions. So I can look and say, well, I sent an email last week to 174 people. Well, okay, well, that's 174 people that may or may not have been interested in what I was talking about. But three of those people clicked on a link, came to my website, and read 4 pages.
Hmm.
That's a sign.
Right. That's
Right?
totally a sign.
That's a sign. Like maybe I should send them a direct email and say, hey, it's been a while since we connected, Kathy. Can I, can I get 15 or 20 minutes and buy you a cup of coffee?
Yeah. And again, I like we've actually the book by Bob Berg, The Go-Giver, comes up a lot.
Hmm.
And Bob and I met many years ago through the National Speakers Association. Really interesting man, and the concept of kind of that giving first and offering value first. Was that was that a mindset shift for you to do that thinking, or is that just part of the like introvert, what I would call calmness in connecting?
Um, I think so. I didn't get exposed to the Go-Giver until after I'd left 3M, and it just really resonated with me. So it's like, this feels right. It feels comfortable. It doesn't feel like I would be an imposter practicing some of these things. In fact, I was probably already doing some of the things that they write about in the book. Um, but it was interesting in that, you know, I would say generally when I was at 3M, if people were reaching out to me, my default setting, it sounds terrible to say this, but my default setting was no. Like somebody wants to sell me something,
Yes.
I'm on somebody's list. They send me like 7 or 8 unanswered emails. Like it was just my default setting was ignore. And now I would say my default setting is sure, let's have a cup of coffee. That's kind of become um my like, sure, why not? Let's get to know one another. Worst case scenario, I've got a cup of coffee and I got to know somebody else, and there may or may not be any opportunity to do something in the future, but the default setting has become more yes, I guess.
Yes.
Interesting side note on that. I still get these terrible, I call them random acts of automation. Instead of
Hey,
random,
wait, say that one again because I know there's somebody listening that either has gotten that or does that.
yeah, they're random acts of automation, which is a spin on the random acts of marketing that Authentic Brands talks about. But the random acts of automation are, somebody reaches out to you on LinkedIn, hey, it'd be great to connect. So you say, sure. And then 30 seconds later, there's an email in your inbox that says, here's a whole bunch of blah, blah, blah that you didn't ask for. And then the next day, there's another email. And the day after that, there's another email. And the day after that, there's another email. So I actually have someone, it's a virtual assistant that I have that goes through my inbox. And when somebody has sent me 6 unanswered emails that are kind of that pattern, I send them a note and say, I help people with their marketing strategies. I bet you get a lot of bookings, you don't get a lot of business, you have a really low conversion rate. This is actually a terrible way to sell to from business to business perspective. Would you like me to help you build an engagement plan that works? And so I actually I don't mind now. It used to bother me when people would be pestering
Right,
me, but when I get like the fifth, like sometimes I'll go in and I'll look and they're only at 4. They're not going to go into my nurture sequence yet. But once they get to 6, then I'm going to email them back and say, you know, I bet this doesn't work very well for you. Would you
right.
like
Let
to?
me help. Let me help you be genuine.
Yeah.
So how did you guys? I love random acts of automation. Uh, how did you evolve into creating communities? Because that feels like a place where you and I have crossed paths, and it's such a brilliant move where everybody wins.
Yeah. So I remember I told you when like my game plan for finding out about a new discipline or a new area is
The
find
conference.
thought leaders, Google people in LinkedIn, follow them, find out what they're reading, and then go to the conference. So when I became a fractional executive, I had never heard of a fractional executive before. I didn't even know that that's what I was doing was called. So it was a brand new term. Somebody said, "Oh, you're a fractional executive." It's like, oh, I looked up the definition. Yeah, that kind of feels like what I'm doing. Maybe I am a fractional executive. So I updated my LinkedIn, so I'm a fractional executive, and then I started Googling for thought leaders, and I found a bunch of people who are really strong in that community. And then I was looking for the conference. I thought, there's got to be a conference. There's everything I'm seeing in LinkedIn is fractional this, fractional that. And there wasn't one. So I sent an email to the 15 or 20 fractional executives that I had met up until that point. And I said, we're going to start a conference. And I set a meeting for Wednesday afternoon at 1 o'clock. And it was an 8 week, every Wednesday for 8 weeks at 1 o'clock. And we're going to do it like a discovery. Like, is there a market? If we built a conference, would people come? Could we find speakers? How would we pay for it? How would we operationalize it and execute it? Like, what are all of the things in front of us? Like, you need to create an LLC, you need to get a bank account, you need to get contracts, you need to find a space, you need like, there's all of these things on a punch
Right.
list. Um, 8 weeks later, of the 20 people I'd invited originally, there were about 7 or 8 that had stuck with me for 8 weeks. And they were kind of invested. They were like, yeah, there should be a conference. We should build it. So in 2023, we had our first event. We had about 200 people attend. It was over 2 days. We had about 30 speakers, and it was awesome. And the best part about that event was meeting other fractional executives face to face. There had not been a place where you could sit nose to nose with somebody and have a cup of coffee and talk about your journey to becoming a solopreneur. And these are the issues I'm having. And have you run into these kinds of problems? And that really strong sense of community was just amazing. Like the speakers were wonderful, don't get me wrong, but the best part about that conference was sitting down with people and sharing stories and getting to know people better.
Mhm.
Um, so we did it 1 year, and then we did it a second year. The second event just happened a few weeks ago in Minneapolis, and we've already got the third event in the calendar, and tickets are available today. And a bunch of people have already signed up for next year.
That's so awesome. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, and also you have now this a CEO sort of running it, that it's evolved in 2 years to building that. And do you have groups too of community? Isn't that one of the offshoots?
Yeah. So we after the first year, we surveyed people and said, what did you like the best? What's missing? What could we do more of? What could we do less of? So we were asking people who had attended, like, how can we make this even more relevant for you? And they said, the face-to-face event was awesome, but, you know, 11 out of 12 months, I'm still feeling pretty alone. I've got questions that come up first of the year that, I want to be able to reach out to a group of people and ask them questions. So we created or actually, I shouldn't say, well, I suppose it's we, but it's Liz Otson is one of the other founders of Frac, and she has a concept around community that she calls hives. So we've introduced that community of hives to the fractional conference. And this year, I think we have 26 groups, all
Wow.
sort of small groups, about 10 people in each one. And the goal of that is to meet every month, and there are topics to talk through. There's agenda, there's a homework, there's a facilitator, but the whole idea is to build this little hive over the next 11 months, and then come back again next November and meet in person. And my goodness, the amount of energy around those hives and people finding it's almost like building your own board of advisors, right? Like we're all in
Yep.
this together. These are the issues I'm having. somebody else on the call is having another challenge. Everyone kind of, you know, through generosity of spirit and time is like, here, let me help you try and solve that problem. And yeah, so that's an amazing outcome of the fractional conference. And another thing that people asked us for help with was, well, I guess two things. Very often, fractional executives will go and engage with a client and they kind of take them through a therapy session. And that therapy session is how do I make my business better? What are the things I need to go solve? So you help clients with those kinds of conversations. So now we've created a space for fractional executives or solopreneurs to experience that same kind of a structured therapy session for themselves
Mm.
and to do, 5-year, 3-year, 12-month planning. So that's a fractional conference event that's coming up here in December in the Twin Cities. We're going to run a beta. And then, once we've kind
Okay,
of
wait,
got,
I'm gonna pause on that one and say too that the FRAC conference, in Minneapolis, of course, it'll be listed in the show notes, but I know Liz well because Liz and I worked together at Fallon in one of our early jobs. And, just good, smart person, building community and connection. And uh, it's funny you said 1, 3, and 5 years. I know I've run my own business for almost 20 years, and I still have those moments of like, okay, well, wait, maybe I want to be in one of those groups. So don't edit at 5 because I think there are different phases of the solopreneur journey, at least. Like I was so bummed to miss the conference the past 2 years because I think you get sort of set in your ways and you don't realize, oh, I'm lonely until now comes in like life events. And then you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, what is going on?
yeah, life happens to you whether you're ready for it or not.
Yeah.
Which actually brings me to another conference. So 2023, we had our fractional conference and it was a lot of work. We learned a lot in the sort of lead up to that event, but it was amazing. But afterwards, I was, pretty pumped, and I was meeting with my friend Kyle Woody from Jack's Caregiver Coalition, and we were having a coffee, so a literal face-to-face meeting, and he was, asking, so tell me about this conference you had, and he was very genuinely asking about what the event was and where it was and how did we pull it off and how did you find a caterer and what about recording of the sessions and will they be available afterwards and all those sorts of things. Did you simulcast it and he was asking so many questions. I said, Kyle, why so many questions? Like I appreciate that you're interested in this, but and he said, oh, well, we've always dreamed of having a conference. I want to find out as much as I can. And I said, well, I've got this big Excel spreadsheet and I met all of the vendors. I said, let's start a caregiver conference. And he was like, do you think we can? And I said, oh, actually, I think you absolutely can. We've got, 12 months. Next November is caregiving month, National Caregiver Month. Let's host it next November. We can find some community partners, American Cancer Society, AARP, ALS, like all of these different groups are all in the Twin Cities and they're serving people with a disease, but I'm sure they have access to caregivers. Let's put on an event for caregivers. So it took him about 10 seconds and he's like, well, if you can help, let's do it. So I was like, sure. So I probably spent almost a day a week, maybe half a day to a day a week for the last year, helping that team pull off a conference, which just happened this past weekend.
And which, as I attended, and I'm on the caregiving journey myself, and had no idea sort of the challenges of it. And I told you this, and I don't know how you are at taking compliments, but for people listening, there's another one coming up in the spring. There'll be
Mhm.
another one annually, and the tone of the event was exactly what I needed because not to diss on other events, but there's a certain element of caregiving that sometimes is like sort of serious and stuffy and sad in this way that I'm like, oh, I just don't really, want to go down that route. I want to go down, you had colored balloons and a great lunch and massage and improv people and
Therapy
content.
dogs
What?
and therapy dogs.
And therapy dogs, yes. And
It was
and
it was for caregivers. It was a day for caregivers, and the
yes.
whole concept was this is a day about you to give you resources and build your community, help you build your community with other people that are on a similar path, so that you can reach out and find people that you can lean on, just like I lean on other fractionals. Um, but the whole goal of that day was create a resource for the caregiver, and then invite them over the next 364 days to take advantage of some of those resources. There's some online um, groups. In April, there's going to be an event in Rochester. In May or June, there's going to be another one in Minneapolis on campus at the U. We're looking for some connections in Duluth that
Mhm.
might be interested in helping us coordinate an event there. Thinking probably September in Duluth, but our goal is to build these in-person events for caregivers so that they can receive um, what they need on their caregiving journey,
Mhm.
whatever those things are.
Yeah, no, it was really great. And again, I was thrilled to hear about it and to be able to make that because I think your piece around to me, it was making the connections or also knowing sometimes when you Google something and then you look at it and then you're not sure, and is this the support group I want to go to, or are these the people or this Facebook group? What I really liked was it gave me the opportunity to sample a lot of things right there, as well as hear other people's stories. Because again, I liken this to, when I had children, you didn't know until you were in it what you
Mm.
had signed up for. And then you're like, wait, how do I find people? Like, how do I do this? Like, what am I doing? And this is kind of that same thing of like, wait, I'm so far in it now. I got to find some people. So again, I thought it was fabulous, and we'll put that link in there as well. I grabbed all these pamphlets to share with everybody. I'm holding them up, but caregiver.com, it was really great. And you had so many people there. Like you said, AARP and the negative space. And um, why do I always forget Jack's? What is Jack's group?
So it's Jack's Caregiver Coalition, and
Jack's Caregiver Coalition.
yeah.
So Kyle's going to be a guest on the show, in a couple of weeks or months or whenever he signs up for that. And again, I'm just so psyched. You're such a good community builder because here's my thing. You said something. I want to ask one more question too before we have to wrap up. Rob, is you said generosity of spirit and time. Have you always had that mindset, or did that like is that the Canadian in you, or the like?
I don't ever remember a time when I wasn't curious, and I think over time, you know, um, I'm in a spot where, you know, I've had every advantage, you know, great family, great education, born into North America, great economy, school, jobs. Like at some point, my my internal alignment adjusted a little bit and was more like, how can I help other people? And it was like when I was a manager at 3M, my number one goal was how can I help someone else along their career path? It wasn't about how do I get to the next job. Uh, People inside the company would tell you that it seemed like maybe about 15 years ago, my my alignment switched, and it wasn't about me getting to the next job. It was about how do I help people around me get to their next roles. And that just paid so many dividends. That was unintentional, but that
Mhm.
headset change was, you celebrated other people's success. If somebody said, hey, I need help with something, you dropped what you were doing and you went and you helped them. And it's just been a real, I don't know, it's been the way that I've moved through the world probably for the last 10 or 15 years. 10 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer in stage 4. And that was a real reset as well, where things that I thought were important before that weren't important anymore.
Mhm.
And you also realize that everyone is walking around with it. It's not just the people at work and the things that they're doing at work, but they've got an entire story. They've got family and parents and kids and partners and all kinds of scenarios and situations going on that make them a whole person. And I think really intentionally tried to start to understand like what gets somebody out of bed in the morning and what motivates them. And like, yeah, sure, work is part of what you do, but it's not the whole story, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I can't put my finger on the date, but that's kind of always been the way I've operated is just really try and understand and know people and, how can I help?
I love it. Well, I'm thrilled to be in your orbit, Rob. And what I'd love to say is either one more thing for the listeners, one more little tip, or what can we do to help you with frac or caregiver con, what would make, because again, I've seen your communities that you build and everybody wins. And I love communities like that.
Well, if you know a caregiver, so if a listener out there knows a caregiver, send them a link to caregivercon.com and just ask them to check it out. Because, I think there's 4 kinds of people. This is a Rosalind Carter quote.
I have the postcard upstairs. Yeah.
Oh, you got the postcard upstairs. Yeah. So her quote was, you either are a caregiver or you will be a caregiver or you will need caregiving yourself. But you can't get out of the world without somewhere along the way being a caregiver. And wherever you are on that journey, I think there's something at Caregiver Con for you.
Awesome.
So
Awesome.
if you
Well,
don't think that you need it right now, pass it on to somebody who you think might.
yeah, thank you so much for being here. Again, we'll find you on LinkedIn and at the Caregiver Con. And again, listeners, it was great. I feel filled up and rejuvenated a little bit. And I got a couple improv tips too. So maybe I'll be funnier too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the All-Star Networking Show with Kathy Paper. If you're interested in being a guest, please contact Kathy at www.rockpaperstar.com.